So that takes us to the check-in stage. Now, the check-in stage is, as I've been talking about, is where we've implemented the plan for a limited time, ideally, and we're now going to see what the results are of that implementation. Now, for just ease of description, we've trialed the implementation for 2 weeks. We've gathered the data during that 2 weeks, and then at the end of the 2 weeks, we're going to measure that data against what we thought we were going to achieve. So we'd set our targets and our objectives and what we expected as outcomes. We've gathered the data, and now we're checking to see whether we actually hit those or whether there's been a gap between that. Now, I said the ideal because just for ease of description there. But in reality, what might happen is that you may well check it along the 2 weeks. So you're not necessarily going to go wait for 2 weeks to see what the results are. You've probably got a number of check-in points within this stage. So we're going to trial it for 2 weeks. We're going to gather the data from the get-go of the trial. We're going to review the data after 2 days, after 1 week, after 1.5 weeks, after 2 weeks. So we'll have all these micro monitoring points within that check-in phase. So it's not just going to be one. So there are different ways that we can go about that, depending on how significant the change is, depending on how much we've got to keep the finger on the pulse. Because if it's a significant change, which can have significant financial implications if it goes wrong for the 2 weeks, we don't want to wait till the end of the 2 weeks or the month or however long the trial is. We want to keep our finger on the pulse, and we may need to pull the pin or make adjustments before the end of the 2 weeks. And it's a fine balance because you've got to give it enough time for it to settle. So you don't want to pull the pin on it after 2 days, because we may not have bedded down the new process within 2 days. We may need a whole week to get that settled. So you don't want to be too rash, but you don't want to let it go too long if it's obvious that it's not hitting the mark that we'd hoped it would hit. So there are different variations in terms of how that checking can occur. However, the check-in is the stage where we've monitor the performance, and we're evaluating on the outcomes. And those outcomes are the decisions that we've made about improving or dealing with a problem or issue. So we get the data, we look at what we'd set as the standard or the benchmark or the outcome, and we compare the two, and we see if there's a gap of variation. So, we want to be monitoring and checking for things like, errors, because we want to prevent errors rather than having to fix them. We want to be monitoring things such as the elimination of waste. Are we reducing the amount of waste that we're producing? And remember, waste can be hours, it can be materials, it can be equipment, or it can be money. Now, are we improving the inputs? So, for example, are we using less resources to do this task now, but still getting the same outputs? Or are we improving the outputs? Are we actually improving the quality or the amount of output at a high quality? Are we improving the process? Is the process smoother now, which means a reduction in waste of, whether it's people standing around or steps that are unnecessary or superfluous, and so forth. Do we have a better understanding of what we're doing? So do we understand variation and inconsistency and are able to deal with those on the spot better? How do people feel? Are people actually feeling better about the new task? So we want to monitor about whether there's an increase in job satisfaction. So, for example, people aren't so bored anymore, or they don't find the task so tedious. Or is there an improvement in positive affect? Are people happier? Do they have improved pride about their task and their work and the team? So these are just some examples. It's not comprehensive, but just some examples of the type of things, the type of data that we need to be gathering and monitoring in the check-in phase to see whether it's actually having a positive impact. So, and it can be a mix of all these things. For example, the outputs we could actually, our performance output might be a bit lower, but our job satisfaction is increased. So you wouldn't necessarily say, oh, look, it's a total loss. What can we identify, or how can we tweak it so that we can maintain the higher job satisfaction and still look at maybe we can improve the output a bit more. So you're measuring multi-dimensional criteria on whether we're being successful with our changes or not. And the type of questions that you could ask yourself or ask others is the process or procedure working as intended? Are we achieving the results that we had hoped? Are there other problems of issues that have arisen that we didn't expect? Is it necessary to have more inputs to be able to support the change? Are there any associated health and safety issues that popped up that we didn't consider? Has it had any other impacts or any impacts on other areas of the business? Are these positive or negative impacts? Do they have any other further action that needs to be taken? So are there other steps that we could take? Can these ideas and processes be successfully transferred to other areas of the business? So these are some typical questions that we might ask through that check-in stage, where we're actually studying the results and trying to inform ourselves before we make a decision at the next stage on how to act on what we've found. So in terms of asking questions, you want to ask, like I said, whether it's the team, might be management, might be end users or customers, it could be other stakeholders like suppliers even.